Hi, boys and girls. It's Mrs. Atkinson. Welcome back. Happy Monday to you. I want to get started by telling you the three things that are going to be very, very handy to have available to you in this topic. And this will span our entire study of decimals for the next 2 weeks. So we'll have a whole week of decimals, then we have a week of spring break. And then when we come back from spring break, we're going to wrap up our decimals unit a whole nother week. And then on that Friday, we'll take our decimals test. At least that's the plan. All right, so the three things that would be extremely helpful for you to have printed out as we go through this unit are the following. The first one is called Topic 12 Notes on Decimals, and this is what I'm going to be using to guide our learning throughout all of the videos and our live Zoom sessions. So while it's not necessary to have them printed out, it would be very helpful. So if you do have a working printer at home, I would actually suggest that you stop this video right now if you can and go print them out. I had sent the link to your parents, so they have all this information. So that's one thing that would be really helpful. The next thing is a practice packet that's going to look very familiar to you. It's the same kind of a packet that I would prepare if we were in school. So even though it does say fractions and decimals are very closely related. So these are the standards for decimals in 4th grade, and you'll find lots of helpful practice sheets. Now, again, this is not something that you have to do, but if you're finding that you need extra practice, or if you're looking for something to do just to kind of solidify your understanding of decimals, this would be a great resource to have printed and keep handy. And then finally, there's a one-pager that talks about the rules of decimals. And it goes through how to add decimals, how to subtract decimals, and then how to multiply and divide decimals as well. These are the 4 operations of things that you're going to have to do with decimals. In 4th grade, we're just adding and subtracting, but when you move on to 5th grade, multiplying and dividing decimals are key concepts. And I always like to introduce it to you, and a lot of you can probably understand it and handle it now, so why not? All right, let's get started for today. Welcome. Today is Monday, and what I want to do today, our main goal for our lesson today, is just to provide an overview of all of the key concepts in the entire topic. So we're going to move really quickly, and then tomorrow we'll slow down and get into each lesson with a little bit more depth. So on the front cover of your Topic 12 notes packet, you're going to see something that's going to be very, very helpful to you. And this is just understanding place value. If you haven't yet watched the Math Antics video on place value with decimals, it's really worth your time in watching. You could just Google it, search it up. It's also available on our Google Classroom. The decimal point is simply a symbol that is going to separate a whole number from a fractional part of a number or a part of a whole. And essentially, decimals and fractions are the same exact thing. They're just written a little bit differently and displayed differently. So whereas when you go to the left of a decimal point, your numbers are getting bigger as we do the whole numbers, right? We start in our ones place, tens, hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, 100,000s, millions, 10 millions, and we could go on and on and on. Numbers never end. And that decimal point, when we go to the right of it, our numbers are actually getting smaller. So that's a really critical thing to be understanding. The place value immediately to the right of the decimal point is called the tenths. Then we have the hundredths, and then we have the thousandths. And notice how I'm really emphasizing that THS. Okay, and you'll notice there is no oneths place, right? It starts with the tenths. All right. Again, keep this handy, pack it handy. It is going to be helpful to you. So let's go on to page number 2. I did number the pages as well. So a decimal is simply a number with one or more digits to the right of the decimal point. And we've talked a lot about in class how any whole number, essentially, like if I make a 75 here, there is a decimal point, you just can't see it. It's kind of invisible, right? But if I did put a decimal point there, I would then put a 0 after, and I could make as many zeros as I wanted going to the right. But there's no need to put a decimal point in a bunch of zeros if we don't need to. So we can just leave it as 75 and without the decimal point. However, when we do put a decimal point, it's because we're representing a fractional part of a whole. And that decimal point is a dot that's used to separate, if you're talking money, dollars from cents, or if you're just talking a number, to separate ones from tenths in a number. So let's talk about a few numbers. What if I had 25 and, that's what we say when we get to the decimal point, 32 hundredths. I always want to say the very last place value that I land is really going to be what is most focused on for how to say a decimal number. So I would say this just as a regular whole number for 25, and then I would say and when I hit the decimal point. And then you're going to read this kind of like you would a whole number, 32. But then after you say 32, you're going to say that last place value, so hundredths. And remember, I'm emphasizing that THS. Let's try another one. What if I had 506 and 4 tenths? I could leave it like that, right? So it's 506. Try not to say the word and. We learned that saying 506 is actually incorrect. And this is why, because the and is reserved for when we have a decimal. So this number would read 506 and 4 tenths. Let's try one more. How about 8,250 and 703 thousandths? So 703 thousandths, right? That's a pretty big number. Now, you'll notice that there's no such thing as oneths. I've always had kids commenting on that, but Mrs. Atkinson, why not? And it's simply because this 3 here represents tenths, and there is no such thing as oneths. 1 is reserved for your whole number, and you'll see tens go to the right. The same thing is here. So you can kind of picture these 2 spots, your starting point, your 1 and your decimal, because you can't have part of something, right? And then it kind of goes out from there and it matches up a little bit better. So we have tenths matches with tens, hundredths matches with hundreds, thousandths matches with thousands, and so on. Place value works in reverse when moving to the right of the decimal point, just as we said. So let's take a few examples of how fractions actually relate to decimals. It says to write 3 tenths as a decimal. So if I was writing 3 tenths as a decimal, I would write it like that, right? And some people like to put a 0 in front. That says 3 tenths. And that is the same thing as saying 3 tenths as a fraction. We're going to notice the denominator, it's 10. Therefore, we're working with tenths. And I want you to ask yourself, well, how many tenths am I working with? And in this case, it is 3 tenths. So it's written as 0.3, and the 3 is in the tenths place, right? Tenths, that would be hundredths. How about we write 15 100ths as a decimal? So if we have 15 hundredths, it would look something like that. And again, we might want to add a 0 there. We're noticing that the denominator is 100. Therefore, we're working with hundredths. And you can say to yourself, well, how many hundredths am I working with? Oh, my battery's running out. How many hundredths am I working with? And in this case, I have 15 hundredths, and it can be written like that. And this is equivalent to 15 over 100 written as a fraction. Now, I want to do a little bit of writing with decimals. So take out a plain piece of paper if you don't have one. And I would like for you, or if you have this space on the bottom, you could write right here, just like I'm doing. I would like you to write 5 tenths as a decimal for me? Give you a second. Okay, you should have written 0.5 or 0.5. Excellent. Let's try another one. I would like you to write 27 hundredths for me as a decimal. And you should have written 0.27 or 27 hundredths. Great job. All right, let's take a look at the next paper. On page 3, we're talking about writing decimals on a number line, and this can be really tricky for a lot of kids. Number lines are sometimes confusing, but it's really essential to understand how they work. So the first one says, locate 4 tenths on a number line. So we first want to say, well, what is 4 tenths as a decimal anyway? And we know that 4 tenths would look like that, the 4, and it's in the tenths column. So now we're drawing a number line and dividing the distance from 0 to 1 with the number of pieces it should be cut into. Now we know that we look at the denominator of our fraction if we were using fractions for this. So by looking at the denominator, we know that it should be split up into 10 equal parts. And like we learned in school, it's always important to count your leaps, right? So if we were counting our leaps, we would say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And if we were writing them as fractions, this would be 1 tenth, this would be 2 tenths. Remember this, guys? 4 tenths, 5 tenths, 6 tenths, 7 tenths, 8 tenths, 9 tenths, and then 10 tenths, which would be equal to a whole. So if I'm looking for 4 tenths, where would that be? Oh, here it is. And I can make my dot there. So this is 4 tenths. Now, in between each of these tenths, I could zoom in on that and I could break that up into 10 parts, couldn't I? If I made 10 little lines in here, I don't know if I'm actually doing that correctly, but picture that there was 10, right? So this would also, I could add a 0 actually to all of these, and I could call this 40 hundredths. So 4 tenths is also equivalent to 40 100ths, because then this would be, I'll add zeros to everything. So you can see how these two would be equivalent. 4 tenths is the same thing as saying 40 100ths if this was broken up into hundredths. All right, let's try another example. Locate 3.75 on a number line. So the first step is to draw a number line that starts at 3 and ends at 4. So I'm going to make my 3 and I'm going to make my 4. Like that. And now I'm just going to count my leaps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right, let's see that. All right, and now, I'm sorry, this lighting is not the best. I'm trying to sit by a window to make it lighter for you guys. So I have 10 parts. So then I can number these, and I could say 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, 3.4, 3.5, 3.6, 3.7, 3.8, 3.9, and then this would be 4. So I'm looking for a number 3.75. So I want to kind of look for the 3.7 and the 3.8. And I know that 3.75 would be right in the middle. I'm going to change my color for a minute. Because this technically is divided up into 10 little marks in there. Let's see if I can actually do that. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I did it. And so right here, would be 3.75, right in the middle. The final thing we're going to be talking about in this topic is comparing decimals. And there's lots of ways to compare decimals, and we're going to be learning a few different strategies, but it's actually not that hard. When comparing decimals, the thing to remember is that you always want to look at each place value position. And the helpful hint is if you think of it in terms of money, you can never go wrong. We all like money, so we'll always want the most. So if you do these things, you'll never get them wrong. Let's try it. Would you rather have 1 penny or 1 dime? And of course, you're thinking about that, and you're thinking, I'd rather have a dime than a penny. At least I would. 1 penny would look like this. It is equivalent to 1/100th, right? And 1 dime looks like this, 0.1. Sometimes you could have a 0 after that. And that's equivalent to 10, either 1/10 or 10/100ths, right? So, which one would you rather have? I'd rather have 10 out of 100 than 1 out of 100. So 1/10 is greater than 1/100th. Another way to do that is simply to write these two decimals side by side. And the most important thing is that you're lining up your decimal points. I am going to be really, I'm going to really be honing that in. You have to line up your decimal points. If we were in school, we would be marching around the classroom saying, line up your decimal point, line up your decimal point. Maybe I should make that an activity this week. Now you're going to be able to always start all the way to the left at your greatest place value. And let's see which column of place value it differs. So we both have a 0 in our ones position. Then we have our decimal point. That's the same. And now I'm looking in my tenths and I notice a difference. This is a 0. This is a 1. What's bigger, a 0 or a 1? A 1, of course. That means that 10/100ths is going to be greater. Let's take a look at this next one. We have 6 and 21/100ths compared to 6 and 9/100ths. So if you think about it in dollars and cents, would you rather have $6.21 or would you rather have $6.09? All right, so here's how we can figure this out. We can compare them by writing them directly underneath of each other, making sure to line up those decimal points. And when we do that, we start at our greatest place value. In that ones column, they're both the same, so I need to keep moving on. Then I have my decimal, they're both the same, of course. Moving on to my tenths place, I have a 2 and a 0. What's bigger, a 2 or a 0? A 2, of course. So I know that 6 and 21/100ths is greater than 6 and 9/100ths. Let's try 2 more quick examples. We have 8/100ths and 7/10ths. Now, at first glance, you might say to yourself, well, an 8 is bigger than a 7, so 8/100ths is going to be bigger. But check out where those place values lie. Where are those digits lying? If I have 0.08 and then I have a 0.7, right? And I can actually fill in zeros in these empty spots just to even it out. I love everything even, right? And now I can start comparing. So in my ones place, they're both the same. I move over, I have decimals, I move over to my tenths, and what do I notice? They're different. So is a 0 bigger or is a 7 bigger? A 7 is bigger. So 7/10ths is greater than 8/100ths. All right, and finally, 7 and 1/100th or 7 and 1/10th. And what I could do if I wanted to think about this in terms of money, I could add a little 0 on there. Would you rather have $7.01 or $7.10? And of course, $7.10 wins. All right, guys, flipping over to that final page. This is just a page for you to do a little work on. I'm not going to go through all of them. but we can complete the chart if we know that we're given 6/100ths as a decimal. I can write it as a fraction like that. I can give it a name, and I would write 6/600ths, and I could even make a model. And making a model is going to kind of, be time consuming. But if you can think of the square, and if I can make 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There we go. And if I shade in 6 of them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This doesn't really look very accurate, but if I shaded in 6 little boxes, that would represent 6 out of 100, or 6/100ths. Now here, I'm given my model, and I need to come up with the other blank spaces. So I can say this is a 10, right? This would be 20, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38. So that would be 38. I'm going to write my fraction first, 100ths. As a decimal, I could write that 0.38, and I would call it 38/100ths. Just like that. All right, let's see if you can do the rest. And on the next page, there's a few more. And there's even a final question, and I want you to consider that as you're working through this. All right, guys, that is our lesson for today. Join me tomorrow for when we talk about lesson 12.1, fractions and decimals. Thanks so much, guys, for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and give me 2 thumbs up. Have a great day.